The Justice Secretary had to go to Parliament cap in hand last week and change her own law because it was riddled with loopholes on things like murder and stalking, really dangerous and important offences.
If the prisons were full, what would you have done? I mean, you have done emergency release previously, haven't you?
Well, I tell you what I would do. I would get the 10,500 foreign national offenders out of our prisons, out of our country. That is the number one thing we can do to free up prison capacity. And how do you do that? Use every
foreign criminals refusing UK deportation, a national crisis. Before we dive into what might be one of the most contentious policy failures in recent British history, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stay updated on stories like this that the mainstream media barely scratches the surface of. Right, let's get into it. Nearly half of foreign criminals are refusing to leave Britain. Let that sink in for a moment. Not a small minority, not a handful of isolated cases. Nearly half. And the British taxpayer, well, you're footing the bill for their appeals whilst they walk free on our streets. Welcome to British News Blog, where we don't sugarcoat the uncomfortable truths about United Kingdom politics. The numbers are staggering, and frankly, they're damning. Between July 2024 and July 2025, just 2,632 foreign criminals, a mere 51%, were actually removed directly from prison under the early removal scheme. That means 49%, almost an equal split, decided they'd rather fancy their chances fighting deportation orders. And here's the kicker, they're doing it on human rights grounds. The very system designed to protect the vulnerable is being weaponized by those who've already proven they have little regard for British law. Now, you might be wondering what happens to these individuals whilst they lodge their taxpayer-funded appeals. Are they detained? Are they monitored? Well, here's the uncomfortable reality that should make every British citizen sit up and pay attention. They cannot be detained indefinitely. So after serving their sentence, assuming they've even served a full sentence given our revolving door prison system, they are released onto our streets. Yes, you heard that correctly. Foreign criminals who've broken British law, refuse to leave when asked, are walking among us whilst bureaucratic wheels turn at a glacial pace. Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick hasn't minced his words on this matter, and quite frankly, he's struck a nerve that resonates with millions. His statement cuts through the political jargon. Those who come to this country and break our laws must be deported. It's as simple as that, he says, and is absolutely right. There's no nuance needed here. You come to Britain, you're welcomed, you're given opportunities that many nations wouldn't dream of offering, and then you commit crimes. The social contract is broken. The expectation should be crystal clear. You're going home. But Jenrick goes further, and this is where it gets particularly damning for the current government. He's called it a complete scandal that nearly half of foreign criminals under the early release scheme are being let out onto the streets before removal. Think about what that means. These aren't people overstaying visas or committing minor administrative infractions. These are criminals, convicted criminals. And given what we know about reoffending rates, particularly among those released early, Jenrick argues this presents a clear danger to the public. It's difficult to argue against that logic, isn't it? If you're finding this analysis valuable, consider subscribing because we're going deeper into stories like this every single week, exposing the policy failures that others won't touch. Reform UK MP Lee Anderson has taken an even harder line, calling the situation a national embarrassment. And that phrase, national embarrassment, it stings because it rings true. We're talking about half of foreign national offenders being allowed to remain in Britain. Anderson pulls no punches. It's yet another example of soft-touch Britain. That characterization, whether you agree with Reform UK's politics or not, taps into a genuine frustration that millions of Britons feel. The sense that our country has become too accommodating, too willing to put the rights of foreign criminals above the safety and interests of British citizens. Reform UK's proposed solution? Immediate deportation after a prison sentence ends. No IFS, no buts, as Anderson puts it. It's a hardline stance, certainly, but in the court of public opinion, it's likely to find considerable support. When you're explaining to a mother in Manchester or a pensioner in Plymouth why someone who committed a serious crime and has no right to be here is still walking their streets, The nuances of appeal processes and human rights legislation start to feel rather academic, don't they? Now, the Home Office has attempted to put a positive spin on these frankly dire statistics. They've highlighted that the number volunteering for early removal is up 10% on the previous year, rising from 2,385 to the current figure. They've also noted that total returns of foreign offenders since Labour came to power in July 2024 reached 5,179, a 14% increase compared to the 4,532 in the same period previously. On paper, these percentages sound encouraging, but let's apply some critical thinking here, shall we? A 10% increase in voluntary removals is hardly cause for celebration when we're still dealing with nearly half refusing to go. And yes, total returns are up 14%, but that's against the backdrop of what many would argue is already an inadequate removal rate. It's rather like celebrating that you're only sinking slightly slower than before. The ship is still going down. The government can dress up these statistics however they like. But the fundamental problem remains. Thousands of foreign criminals who should be on flights out of Britain are instead navigating our legal system, at our expense, whilst residing in our communities. The government spokesperson's response is textbook bureaucratic deflection. We're committed to deporting foreign national offenders, they say, and aim to remove them at the earliest opportunity. Aim to. That phrasing is doing rather a lot of heavy lifting, isn't it? We don't want aims. We want results. The spokesperson goes on to explain that those who challenge early removal may be detained for a reasonable period after their custodial sentence whilst deportation is pursued. May be detained. For a reasonable period. The vagueness is almost artful. What constitutes reasonable? Who decides? And what about those who aren't detained? Then comes the reassurance about rigorous measures to manage foreign offenders in the community, including electronic monitoring. Now, electronic monitoring, or tagging as it's commonly known, has its place. But let's be brutally honest about its limitations. It tells you where someone is, not what they're doing or planning to do. It's a tracking tool, not a prevention mechanism. And for the victims of crimes committed by individuals who should have been removed from the country months or even years earlier, knowing that the perpetrator was being electronically monitored offers cold comfort indeed. Make sure you're subscribed because next week we're diving into the human rights legislation that's being used to block these deportations, and you won't want to miss that investigation. The government insists it remains focused on managing cases through the legal process to remove barriers to deportation. But here's the question that nobody in government seems willing to address head-on. What if the legal process itself is the barrier? What if the framework we've constructed, with its layers of appeals and protections, has become so labyrinthine that it's effectively unworkable when it comes to removing foreign criminals? That's not a comfortable question for any government to face because the answer might require acknowledging that the system needs fundamental reform, not just better management. Let's consider the broader implications of this policy failure because it extends far beyond the immediate issue of foreign criminals remaining in Britain. Every foreign national who successfully games the system, who manages to extend their stay through appeals and legal challenges despite being convicted of crimes, sends a message. It tells those considering coming to Britain illegally or those who might be contemplating criminal activity that there's a reasonable chance you won't face the ultimate consequence of deportation. It undermines the rule of law. It erodes public confidence in the justice system. And perhaps most insidiously, it fuels the narrative that Britain is indeed a soft touch, a nation that's lost the will to enforce its own borders and protect its own citizens. The political ramifications are equally significant. This isn't just a Home Office problem or a Justice Ministry headache. This cuts to the heart of the social contract between government and governed. British citizens, particularly those who followed the rules, paid their taxes, and contributed to society, are watching foreign criminals exploit legal loopholes to remain in the country. The resentment this breeds isn't some abstract political theory. It's real, it's palpable, and it's driving voters towards parties and politicians who promise, credibly or not, to take a harder line. Robert Jenrick and Lee Anderson aren't making these statements in a vacuum. They are responding to genuine public anger. Whether you agree with their politics or not, they've identified an issue where the gap between public expectation and government delivery is cavernous. The British public's tolerance for what they perceive as weakness on crime and immigration has worn paper thin. Every headline about a foreign criminal who should have been deported but wasn't, who then goes on to re-offend, does incalculable damage to public trust. And let's talk about the victims, shall we? Because in all these discussions about deportation rates and appeal processes and human rights legislation, there are real people who've suffered real harm at the hands of foreign criminals. Victims who have every right to expect that once justice has been served, once a sentence has been completed, that the person who harmed them will be removed from the country. Instead, they face the nightmare possibility of encountering their attacker on the streets, of living with the knowledge that the person who destroyed their sense of safety remains in Britain, potentially in the same community. The taxpayer dimension is equally galling. British taxpayers are funding the appeals of foreign criminals fighting deportation. Think about that for a moment. Your money, earned through your labor, taxed by the government, is being used to help people who've committed crimes in your country avoid the consequence of being sent home. It's perverse. And whilst legal aid exists for good reasons, and access to justice is a fundamental principle, there's something deeply wrong with a system that prioritizes the rights of foreign criminals to remain in Britain over the rights of British citizens to feel safe in their own communities. Before we wrap up, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we're bringing you the political analysis that cuts through the spin every single week. The 49% refusal rate isn't just a statistic. It's a damning indictment of a system that stopped working for the people it's supposed to serve. It's evidence of a disconnect between policy intention and real-world outcomes. And it's a warning sign that unless something changes, unless there's genuine reform rather than ministerial platitudes, this problem will continue to meteorize. More foreign criminals will walk British streets when they should be on planes home. More victims will be left wondering why justice stopped at a prison sentence. And more British citizens will conclude that the government either can't or won't protect them. The question facing policymakers isn't whether this system is working. Clearly, it isn't. The question is whether they have the political courage to admit that fundamental reform is needed, even if it means confronting uncomfortable truths about human rights legislation, appeal processes, and the limits of Britain's accommodation. Because right now, the only people benefiting from this broken system are those who've already proven they don't respect British law. And that, more than any statistic, tells you everything you need to know about the scale of this failure. So that you have it. Nearly half of foreign criminals refusing deportation, walking our streets, funded by our taxes. If that doesn't demand your attention, your scrutiny, and your voice, then what will? Subscribe to British News Blog, hit that notification bell, and join us next time as we continue holding power to account and exposing the stories that matter most to Britain. This is exactly the kind of analysis you need to stay informed in British politics. So make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started. See you in the next one.